All right, welcome back to Classic Game Room, the podcast. Hang on to something because we're going to have some fun today, because today's episode is titled Video Games with Spaceships and Why They're Better Than Video Games with Non-Spaceships. Name one game that doesn't have a spaceship that's any good. You can't, because they all suck. Super Mario Brothers? Complete garbage. Pac-Man takes place on a spaceship. Prove me wrong. Truxton. Earth Defense Force has spaceships. Truxton is a spaceship. Musha. Herzog Zwei has a transforming spaceship. Zaxxon. Every video game without a spaceship sucks. It's just science. And in today's podcast, I'll prove my point by playing video games with spaceships. And you know, before you're banging away in the keyboard going, wait, what about blah 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 video game? Just know that you're wrong. And I'm right. Pole position, there's spaceships in orbit. Who do you think is driving the cars? It's common sense. Frogger, what are logs if not spaceships floating on water that are made of wood? Spaceships make everything better, but why do spaceships make everything better? Well, for one thing, they fly in space, or at least they float on water in space. But I would argue that the spaceships in Frogger are pretty lame, purely from the standpoint that they don't have lasers and destroy things. Also, they could sink. But spaceships with lasers are like the coolest thing ever. That's why we love video games that have spaceships with lasers, preferably ones that also transform into robots. But it's not a prerequisite that you have to transform into anything. Just being a spaceship by itself is pretty cool. And I'm trying to think about, like, where did I get into spaceships? Obviously, Star Wars, Star Destroyers being one of my favorites. I hated the movie E.T. when I was a kid. I remember my dad took me to E.T., and I'm like, this movie sucks because it doesn't have Star Destroyers and Wookiees. And now as an adult in the year 2024, I can look back on E.T. with some perspective and say that I was a brilliant kid because I was 100% right. E.T. sucks because it doesn't have Star Destroyers and Wookiees. But Star Wars is definitely where I got into spaceships, and I remember video games in the arcades in like 1980, 81, whatever. Like Xevious was one of my favorites, Zaxxon, Space Invaders. But like so many of you, I also grew up watching Star Trek, and I love the spaceships in Star Trek, though they were used for the incorrect purpose. Spreading peace and happiness throughout the galaxy is dumb. Like, I always wanted like a different Star Trek show that was just completely awful. Like Star Trek Destroyer, right? I've actually thought of this over the years. Like Star Trek The Next Generation, it's a great show, one of my favorites. You know, the crew of the Enterprise shows up, and they're like, oh, we have to help the Baku Makti whatever with their irrigation problems. And, you know, then they solve some sort of issues, and like some people get into trouble along the way, and then they fix the trouble, everybody learns a moral lesson, and it's, you know, whatever, it's stupid. It would be better if they showed up and took bets on how long it would take for them to use a tractor beam to knock a planet out of orbit and send it into the sun. Like, that would just be funny. If the Star Trek Destroyer just like showed up, you know, out of nowhere, orbiting some pre-warp planet, and they just flipped off the Prime Directive and just started like blasting them with space lasers for yucks. Like, I'd watch that every week. But of course, they'd have to like mine the planet beforehand and like extort the pre-warp civilization or whatever, so they could pay off Starfleet to look the other direction. I have really put some thought into this. If anybody wants this show made, I'm available. Star Trek Destroyer. It's everything Gene Roddenberry had in mind, but didn't. Today, I'm going to take a trip to another arcade. It's what I do. I like arcades because they've got video games with spaceships. They frequently have beer, which is like the liquid equivalent of a spaceship. And to prove my point, you know, what's the fastest spaceship that you've ever seen in any movie? Well, let me rephrase that. What's the coolest spaceship in any film, in all films? It's not the Star Destroyer. It's not an X-Wing fighter. It's not the Enterprise. It's Lone Star's Winnebago from Spaceballs. And what powered that thing? Liquid Schwartz, which was basically a can of beer. And you're probably thinking, does Mark have interests that aren't beer, video games, and movies? Loud music. which complements beer video games and musics. and the musics. The musics enhance the games with the spaceships. Asteroids being a great example. Spaceship and music inspired by Jaws. Uh-oh. I think I might have backed myself into a corner. Well, Jaws isn't a video game. It is a pinball machine. There's no spaceships in Jaws. Wait. Hold on. Now that I've said that out loud, I have figured this out. There is a spaceship connection to Jaws. Who's there? Did someone else beat me to this? Anyone? You know where I'm going with this? Moonraker. James Bond in space fighting Jaws with the help of Dr. Goodhead. Not one of the strongest Bond films, but fun nonetheless. Hey, it's Wednesday night. Let's take a trip to an arcade and find some proper arcade games with spaceships. I'm hoping to find a Zaxxon. I think there's one there, the place I'm going, and I'll see you there shortly. And through the magic of editing, it's like you'll be right there with me. But I'm going to probably make a pit stop first, though. This Winnebago needs some liquid Schwartz. I fly through space. I am a spaceship. My name is Truxton. I'm Truxton. Screw you. See, that song wouldn't work without spaceship in it. You're like, I don't fly through space. I don't blow things up. I suck. I hate fun.
Checkpoint.
It's the next day, so you know I survived. I went to Pins Mechanical last night, which is on the south side of Pittsburgh, right next to one of my favorite places, Hofbrauhaus. So I did make a pit stop prior to playing some spaceship games. This is just incredible. I'm trying to describe this to you. It's basically like has the imposing presence of the monolith from 2001, except it's filled with beer. And it's delicious. And it's sure to improve my game of Zaxxon. Fun was had at Pins Mechanical, but since it was a Wednesday night and the schools are letting out now, a lot of people don't realize this, but Pittsburgh is basically a giant college town. And when the universities end their year or whatever and all the students leave, our population drops by like 2/3, which is great in some respects. Not so good for recording at Pins, though, because the music was just blasting. And there wasn't that crowd noise to soak it up. So every time I tried to record, I'm getting like Ace of Base in the background. And not that I have, any major problems with Ace of Base, but, I want the couple bucks of ad revenue to pay for the beer I bought last night. Now, the arcade games at Pins, at least the Pins that I go to, are free to play. That's right. You can just mosey on in there and play some arcade games, push the button, and rock. Obviously, they make their money from booze and food and kids' parties and bowling. So, it's like a Dave & Buster's, except it doesn't suck. It's not filled with useless redemption machines. You get classic arcade games, which is why I love this place. And pinball. Now, you gotta pay for pinball. Pinball machines are presumably more expensive to maintain, or at least rent, or I don't know how they do. I don't know their business model, and I don't care. But you do have to pay for the pinball machines. Zaxxon, Phoenix, Stargate, free. I know a lot of people are like, why aren't you shooting video anymore? If it's this difficult to just record audio, imagine how much more complicated video is. It's simply not worth it. So just enjoy the sounds.
Oh, they have Zaxxon in Phoenix, and yes, I had a great game of Phoenix. I got my ass kicked at Zaxxon again. But in the corner is like maybe the place with the most crowd noise that drowns out whatever god-awful 90s pop song this is. I am currently playing Iron Maiden Legacy of the Beast.
And you're probably asking, but is there a spaceship in the Iron Maiden pinball machine, and, you know, it's a busy machine, maybe. I mean, where did all the Iron Maiden monsters come from? A spaceship. Maybe they came from the Boston spaceship. Regardless, it's a great game, and they have the premium edition, which is so much fun. This is one of my favorite pinball machines from Stern. Sadly, I couldn't hear the Iron Maiden, though. Like, they had the volume turned down, which is like the complete opposite of what you should do when you have an Iron Maiden pinball machine. I've played it before with the volume up, and it's just amazing. It's actually one of my favorite games from Stern. The layout of the playfield is a lot of fun, and I love how they incorporate all of the different Iron Maiden songs into missions. And, you know, if any band has a style that's immediately recognizable from a distance, it's Iron Maiden. Now, before I got sucked into a bunch of Iron Maiden games, I did play some Zaxxon, but the controller was kind of busted. Now, that's one of the problems with these games that are like 40, 45, 50 years old, and they're free play. They get pounded in the arcade. I'm not sure how many 10-year-olds are, you know, going for Zaxxon after, you know, their minds have been distorted and warped by Minecraft and Roblox. But, you know, presumably somebody's been banging on this controller, so it didn't work real well. But right next to Zaxxon is Phoenix. Now, Phoenix is like one of my favorite arcade games. If you never played it, it's like Space Invaders, kind of mixed with Gorf, Galaga, and Galaxian, like all rolled into one. It's super old school. You play it with the buttons, and there's a great version of Phoenix on the Atari 2600. But finding a Phoenix machine in the wild is kind of a rarity. I've played it before. I played one in Barcade in Philadelphia like a decade ago. They used to have one at Replay FX, and they've got one here at Pins in Pittsburgh. At least as of this recording, it works great. It's so much fun. And yes, Phoenix has spaceships, obviously, as does Zaxxon. So I did get my spaceship arcade game fix with Phoenix, which is conveniently also right next to the door, which leads to a fire pit outside. It's the small things in life that matter. So that, you know, after a couple of games of Phoenix, you can walk out there, you know, just warm up a bit, get some fresh air, walk back inside, and die in the vacuum of space. I did not get to play Stargate. In fact, I didn't walk over to that side of the arcade. I got distracted by Iron Maiden. It's easy to do. But yes, I had a great time playing Phoenix and Iron Maiden. Though what about Zaxxon? Well, I do happen to have a Zaxxon arcade game kind of in my Multicade. So, I have a Xevious Multicade here. The one that used to be on screen in the background of the old classic Game Room reviews. I've got that in my basement. It's a great Multicade filled with spaceship games, and since I have control of my own stereo and own my own music rights, I can play without fear of recording Ace of Base. When the Xevious marquee lights up, that means it's time to party. Welcome to Classic Game Room, the podcast, broadcasting from Mark's basement, where I've got my Xevious Multicade down here filled with games that feature, you guessed it, spaceships. Spaceship. Where to start here, man? There's so many games. We got Galaxian, spaceships. Space Invaders, spaceships. Pac-Man takes place in space. Dig Dug. All right, now, you see, the thing with Dig Dug is that Dig Dug looks like one of the astronauts from 2001, so I think there is a spaceship association with Dig Dug. Like, it may be in space. He could be digging in space and murdering enemies in space in a giant spaceship. It's possible. Dig Dug gets a pass. Galaga 3, Gyrus, Spaceship. Ladybug. I mean, you can't say that Ladybug doesn't take place in space. Burger Time definitely takes place in space. What else we got here? Phoenix, Spaceship, Time Pilot, Spaceship, Super Cobra, kind of like a spaceship. Hustler, the game, not the magazine, could take place in space. We don't know. Super Breakout, definitely space. Arkanoid Space, Quick Space, and Xevious Space. Oh, what have we here? Ladies and gentlemen. Definitely spaceships. Love this game.
Actually, I prefer this game to Zaxxon, to be perfectly honest. Die, you dumbass enemies! Now that I have played Juno first, it is time to play Zaxxon. I never wrote a song about Zaxxon. Zaxxon is the game. Spaceships are my name as I fly through. What are these things? Refineries and space. That song sucks. Alright, that wasn't very good. Spaceships of red, blue, and green. You can hear the alien ladies scream. We want Zaxxon and Truxton. They're both good. How dare you blow up my spaceship in space?
All right. That was fun. So what's going on in the rest of the world of Classic Game Room? I've been running a social media experiment for the past year. I started producing new Classic Game Room videos and game reviews and little shorts and TikToks and experimenting with YouTube and the Meta stuff and TikTok and all these platforms for a year. Trying to figure out what's going on out there in this landscape. And well, after a year, I'll tell you, I've got a lot of information, a lot of data. But nobody ever seems to like it whenever I talk about common sense business stuff because I'm supposed to be an unemployed YouTuber. I am bringing someone on to help make some new videos pretty soon. It takes me too long to make anything. The CGR Publishing music label has obliterated the video business. And Classic Game Room was on the chopping block, but I decided to merge it with the music business. So I've been working with a lot of experimental sound design stuff lately. And one of the recent Omega Ronin albums is titled Mega Uniframe Super Hyper Armor. Obviously a nod to 16-bit video game soundtracks, but not really the Omega Ronin sound. I'm taking the Omega Ronin sound back to the more 80s synthwave and sequencers and stuff, more of a Miami Vice mixed with Blade Runner kind of style. I like doing cinematic synthwave and darkwave industrial kind of stuff. And that's the Omega Ronin sound, but I've got these other patches and sounds and just various sequences and drones designed, and they were sitting here, and I'm looking at them thinking, you know what? I had a few people ask about soundtracks and game design stuff, so instead of closing it down outright, I'm pushing down the pedal, and Classic Game Room is now a sound licensing and royalty-free music distribution company. So I'm doing a lot of sound pack design right now and soundtrack work. It's going to take us a few months to get this going, but you'll see it pretty soon. As I'm grouping stuff by genre, modern games, classic games, working on 16-bit sounds, 8-bit arcade stuff, and cinema, like electronic cinematic scores. So instead of trying to compete against AI video content and losing, I'm not even going to bother. But we do have some very cool plans for video game. Well, you'll see. It's happening. Let's see. Depending on when you listen to this podcast, the Classic Game Room branded video game music should be out there already on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Tidal, and everywhere. And YouTube. Actually, YouTube works perfectly well for music. And I'll play you a song. This actually ended up being a combination of Classic Game Room and Omega Ronin. It just turned out to be a good song, I think. As I started working on the analog gear, trying to come up with drones. I've been building a lot of drones lately, and what that means is it's just a long sound that changes. It drones on and on and on, something like that. So great for sound design work and soundtracks. But I built this drone on one of my Moogs, and I really liked it, and I was putting some other background stuff in it, and it just started to come alive with sound, and it's a lot of fun. And you'll be able to buy this in isolated parts, but what ended up happening is that I just threw a bass line on it, and it was just for fun to see what would happen, and it just turned into an Omega Ronin song. I normally wouldn't use like a hammer bass for video game sounds, but in this case, it just turned into a cool song. So here is a Derelict Soundscape. That's the title of the song and the album. And this one features pretty much every piece of gear that I own, which by now is quite a few pieces of gear. And you'll have to see if you can pick out what's what in there. But it's a pretty simple song, but one that just, I think, sounds nice. So, a Derelict Soundscape. And within a few weeks, this will be on all of the streaming services. But you get to hear it first. Lucky you. Classic Game Room. The music. Almost as good as Classic Game Room, the Flamethrower, but not quite. And what does this have to do with spaceships? If you don't get the reference, God have mercy on your soul. There you go. I'm pretty excited about this because it gives me a chance to focus on marketing and like just off the rails experimental business stuff, which is actually what I'm pretty good at. So instead of trying to compete against 15-second cell phone videos of people copying the most recent TikTok trend or whatever, if they're still, I don't even, what the hell's going, I don't care. Once I started to design the graphics and like the album art on this one in particular, I got really excited about just what we can do with all the stuff that's here. And hopefully some pretty cool videos will be coming up soon, showing how this stuff will actually can be implemented into your game design or really whatever. Even stuff like Atmos is on the table. So quite a turn of events that I'm pretty excited about. The next Ronin album's in development. You want to hear a sneak peek? I mean, I don't care if you do or don't, but I'm going to play it anyway. I'm a big fan of double bass, like Ned's Atomic Dustbin. That's right, never forget the Neds. 2 basses make everything better. And that's a rough drum track on there. The song's still coming together. In fact, they got a whole album coming together. And that'll be out sometime relatively soon. Takes a while. These are pretty complicated now. That's that. So the podcast will continue. See you next week. Not sure what I'm doing, but it's going to be fun. Gives me an excuse to get out there and drink a beer and yammer on about spaceships and stuff. I like doing that, and hopefully you've enjoyed listening if you're still listening this far into the podcast. So I'll see you next time. Classic Game Room, the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and probably somewhere else. I don't know yet. Keep an eye out for some cool gaming clips. The Forever stream continues. And Fridays on Bandcamp are Omega Ronin Hangout Day. So check it out. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Check out ClassicGameRoom.com to see what's going on, and also OmegaRonin.com and CGRPublishing.com. I don't know why, but that's like a throwback to the 90s. Websites. They're so quaint. You're going to need at least a 28.8 US Robotics, though. You know the sound. Ding, ding, ding. Bong, bong, bong.